Well, welcome everybody. Today we have Victor Renolds and we have Sue Tucker joining us to present around virtual and synchronous environments and synchronous opportunities for learning and teaching. Up first is Victor Renolds. Victor has over 12 years experience working in online learning and digital production. He recently submitted his Master of Arts research thesis looking at the experiences of a class of postgraduate students and their use of mobile touch screens, which he might be talking a little bit about today. And he's currently working at Trobe Learning and Teaching, developing strategies and pedagogies that leverage mobile technologies. So it's great if you've also got questions around mobile, but today's session is, very much around synchronous opportunities in education. So welcome, Victor. I'll hand the mic over to you, and if you wanted to share your screen and slides, feel free to do so.
Great. Thanks very much, Kate and Colin, and thanks very much for the invitation. So are you hearing me all right?
Yes, go ahead.
Oh, great, thanks. So I'll just share my screen to get started. And so I was just wondering, Kate, if you could please also be a timekeeper and maybe let me know if when there's 5 minutes to go or something like that. That would be really useful, I think, because I don't want to sort of take up Sue's time. So I'm just going to share I'm just going straight for sharing my preview, my PDF. So I'm calling this session just Zoom Synchronous Communications, because of the synchronous theme for this meeting, and then but as I'm talking about it, I'll try and provide some context behind it. I'm actually going to be talking about a Zoom pilot that we did last year here at La Trobe, where we used the Zoom synchronous, or the Zoom software for synchronous communications across 3 campuses. But first, I'll just go on to talk a little bit, provide a little bit more context. So thank you, Kate, you've already introduced me, so that's fine. So this information here will be just reinforcing that information about me, and you can also get in contact with me via LinkedIn or my La Trobe email address afterwards, and feel free to do that. I'm also on Twitter, vReynolds, but it's something that I'm not a huge Twitter user, but you can contact me that way as well if you like. So one of the things, setting the context for what we did with this trial last year, was all around coming up with a mobile learning strategy as well. So that's something that we're still developing, but really we're trying to think really in terms of what we're doing here at La Trobe Online and within the wider department of La Trobe Learning and Teaching, is just to think about how we can use mobile technologies to enhance learning experiences. And really that's what the main idea of that is about. With mobile learning strategy, I'm not going to talk about that too much because it is still developing, but really it's, except for the approach, which is a mobile first approach, which is just, which basically means mobile, but not just mobile. It's more about ubiquitous computing and using mobile technologies to provide a more seamless learning experience across different environments. So the background to this was that in 2015 there was some PW research which was done here at La Trobe University, and so of course there is some highlights that came out of that. You know, that 95% of the students in the study had a smartphone, and among the research recommendations was adopting a mobile first approach. So to me, in terms of learning design, in terms of what we do in learning and teaching, I was thinking, well, what actually does that mean, mobile first? So this is part of the challenge, was to think of in this space, to start thinking in terms of learning design, how can we apply a mobile first approach and what does that actually look like and what does it, what does it mean and how do we operationalize it? So for me, that was going back to things like, you've probably heard of Luke Wroblewski's mobile first publication, which first came out in 2010. So it's something that's not new in enterprise and certainly in terms of web development and those kinds of things. And then the other part, to put it into the context of higher education, was something that Colin Lumsden said. And basically that was, the world's moving ahead and people are just using mobile devices anyway. So his message was, yeah, you are doing mobile learning, you just don't know it yet. And I thought that was I thought for me, just to highlight those two, I suppose those two different perspectives might give you an idea as to the kind of thinking that we're doing in terms of what mobile first might mean here at La Trobe. And I'm sure that other people have different approaches or possibly similar approaches, but I think we're all thinking in the same space about this as far as I can see at this point in time. Just reinforcing probably some things that you're already aware of, and why is mobile important. And basically, it's just the proliferation of devices that that have happened in the last 10 years, and most of us will know that that really started with the iPhone launch in 2007. Started in the US. iPhone hit Australia in 2008. I came on board straight away. I was really excited about what they had to offer, and of course there's been a mass uptake of that. And I think really that trend in terms of mobile device usage and the mass uptake of it is having reached that critical mass is something that's really made an impact and touched all areas of our lives. Like all sorts of things like how we purchase things, online dating, all aspects of our life have been changed by smartphones. And I think that in higher education, that's one of the opportunities that we're still exploring. Some more census data around this, around about smartphone ownership. So we can see in the second column that more people own smartphones than they do laptops now, and I think that changed in last year. So just a little bit more context about where we're at La Trobe in terms of this space, and even without a strategy, we'd probably be still, this roadmap would look very similar. So this is just a roadmap of showing where we've come from in the past and where we are at the present and what the desired future state is for us. So if we're looking at around about 2015, we had, before that, really we didn't have much in our online learning that was compatible with mobile devices. And then I think it was around about 2015 that we had responsive design applied to our LMS, and we're moving up, and I'm just going through those different types of phases. The situation or the pilot I'm going to be talking about is the targeted stage, where the pilot program that we ran last year was a one-to-one model where all the students in the pilot were provided an iPad. And so we've moved on a little bit from there, and this year we're now looking at more of a BYOD model, but it's kind of, the term bring your own device is probably a little bit, I don't know, I think someone could actually reinvent that term, because most people have devices anyway, so it's not like we're asking people to bring devices along, is it? It's more of that where people are bringing devices along anyway and expecting things to work. And the hard part, of course, is that around about that is that not everything works the same on devices as it does on computers. And the other part too is that we use devices in a very different way to the way that we use laptops and computers. So it's around about negotiating that whole space, and then where we want to get to in the future is to have just to provide as seamless a learning experience across all these environments as much as possible. So I just thought I'd do a check and see if everyone's still there, and good. Okay, thanks guys. So and let me know if I'm going too fast or too slow, that kind of thing. Great, thank you. So I'll just move on to talking more about the pilot program now, because that was it's about synchronous sessions. So what was it? The MBA, it was an MBA pilot. So with our MBA postgrad students, the project or the pilot was part of a La Trobe Learning and Teaching Innovations grant. So basically it had it had buy-in from all the way from the MBA program director, the course coordinator and academics. They were a very seasoned team in terms of delivering online learning. They'd been doing it for, they had some, I think they've been going for probably around about 2 years. They had a really a great knowledge resource in terms of a wiki for getting their staff on board and getting started. And they were really keen to try something in the mobile space because I think they could see that in terms of for their cohort of students and MBA students that, a lot of them are professionals and already working and traveling a lot, and they thought that they could really make the program, the online program, more flexible by being able to utilize mobile technologies. People traveling on a plane, for example, was just one example of how people could use their devices to enhance their studies or to, just to provide more flexible study scenarios or contexts for themselves. We chose the Canvas LMS because using a mobile first approach, basically we decided to use Canvas because it came with an app, and with our testing, we tested 3 different options. I won't talk about all the options, but I'll just talk about that we did choose Canvas for its mobile capabilities. And then, of course, looking at the synchronous sessions technology, we had Zoom. Zoom was something that was already used at the university. It's had probably been used more for staff meetings and things like that, more than for learning and teaching. But we thought that we would actually give that a bit of a road test and see what we could do. And just a little bit of information about Zoom if you're unfamiliar with it. It's used for virtual classrooms, meetings, and as I mentioned, it's a cloud-based application. And again, it's a mobile-first platform where they really have designed it ground up to work really well on native apps. And so that's a little bit about the MBA pilot. The different contexts in which we tried using Zoom for synchronous communications were for fully online and blended modes. So, so a little bit more detail about that is that when we did the pilot, it was for 2 subjects. It was one subject actually called Management Fundamentals, and one of the instances of that subject was running fully online, and the other was running face-to-face. But again, as I mentioned, it was across 3 campuses, and that's the area that we really wanted to try Zoom out. And we thought that there were the most use cases and the most different scenarios where we could actually test it out. So that was across the 3 campuses, Melbourne and Albury-Wodonga and Bendigo. And we used our pilot approach to doing this was to really involve people as much as possible, especially students. So we let students know exactly what we were doing up front, and we're saying, look, this is a pilot. Is this okay with you guys? And we got their consent to go along with that. And to try it out, and they were very understanding, and being professionals already in terms of the MBA. There were people there from different backgrounds. Someone had a digital publishing management background. Someone had a background. One of the guys there worked. I think it was for. I can't remember the bank. Sorry, one of the major banks, and but had a gaming background, so had lots of ideas in terms of how we could use synchronous sessions, which I'll talk about. I'll talk about one example in a moment. And we tried almost everything that we could think of. We tried integrating Zoom with the existing video conferencing technologies and the hardware that was already being used to deliver the lectures online to the other campuses. we tried group presentations, we tried breakout rooms, and amongst the other things like messaging and things like that. There are a whole range of things, but there's some of the highlights. So I'll just show you some of the images of what it looked like and what we did. So this image isn't that clear, but you can see in the background there are all these faces on the screen behind. The person at the back with the red jumper on is Suze Inglis, who actually delivered the face-to-face lectures. And as you can see, there are people behind her on the, I call it the Brady Bunch view, where people's, it's the gallery view of people on Zoom. And these are all the students who are attending across the campuses. And then it doesn't look like there are that many at that point in time, so it might have been earlier on in the session and people might have still been coming on board. We were running it with dual screen, so the screen on the right is what people were seeing on the Zoom screen when Suze was sharing content. So you can see in the foreground that the two iPads, the closest iPad you can see, that's the same screen that's on the right-hand side at the back of the room. If that makes sense, hopefully. And here's a closer view of the same view, except with one of the students who's presenting across the 3 campuses. There's and again, back to Suze, again, it's just a different, a closer view of what the lecture was like across the 3 campuses. And so this particular shot, or these photographs, were taken in the city campus. And yeah, all the other people just appear in the background online or on the screen. And the last, I've got two more photographs to show you and to talk about. So this photograph here, I found this one quite interesting. This is where they split up into these were the breakout rooms where people were just pairing up. And this is a really good example of what you can do with blended, I suppose, because the 2 students in the front, one of them you can only see his extended arm, but they're talking face to face, and so they're having a discussion about a topic, or they were given a task. And the student in the background with the white top, the woman with the glasses and blonde hair, she's online talking to someone participating in that same activity with someone on a different, through Zoom in one of the other campuses. So basically, in this, if I remember correctly, this is going back to last year, so I'm just trying to remember the context of this. I think that they in the city campus and in all the campuses, they just tried pairing people up, and if there was anyone left over, or if they wanted to talk to someone else in one of the other campuses based on what the conversation had been going on in the lecture during those discussions, people would talk to, they'd either pair up with someone if they didn't have a partner to talk to, or they would talk to someone who they really wanted to touch base on. They had a similar interest or a similar point that they wanted to explore in terms of the topic and the subject matter. And then for my last slide, this is the very first session that we did, and the thing that I really love this photo, because the person on the left is Lizzie, who actually attended one of the sessions via her hospital bed. She was in hospital, but she'd paid for her MBA, and she's a really keen student. There was no way she's going to miss out. She managed to attend after she had an operation. I thought that was really great. That's how technology, a great example of how technology can extend the reach of being able to have have these contexts, and I think that's really marvelous. So it's something I like to show. This was during during the break in the first session. That's me at the top holding my iPad and taking a screen grab of this on Zoom. And Sue's behind me at the computer. On the other side is Julianne, who I believe was in Bendigo. And there's another shot of Sue's right there in the middle, because we're using two cameras were on at the time, this point in time. So one of them was the camera that was on Sue's at the lectern, and the other one was the actual VC camera from the video conferencing hardware. So that's pretty much it for me. So thank you very much for listening, and I hope that was I hope you enjoyed that, and that there, if you have any questions that have come out of this, that would be great. I'm very happy to answer any questions about any of this. So thank you.
Thanks, Victor, for your presentation regarding looking at Zoom across campuses and how we can implement mobile first. If everybody could maybe put some kind of, thanks in the chat. And also, if you have any questions, feel free to grab the mic or put something in the chat, and we'll look to respond. So we've got time for a few quick questions. Like to get Sue on in about 5 minutes. So if you do have a few quick questions, otherwise there'll also be some time at the end.
I have a quick question. Oh, sorry. So what did you learn from going through this process that you'll sort of use to evolve it in future iterations?
Yeah, thanks for asking. So I think in terms of firstly the pilot, and that's one of the points I did want to make, was that we tried almost everything. In fact, we probably were too ambitious and tried too much. So there were some hiccups along the way. So for example, in the first session, we identified pretty quickly that when you're using Zoom or this technology, synchronous sessions technology, in a blended situation, or when you've got a lot of the iPads were quite close together in proximity, and people had their microphones on, we would get feedback, and that proved to be something that we had to manage. So it was basically around trying to differentiate between what we need to manage as a process and what we actually need to manage as what would be a technical enhancement or that kind of thing. So I think one of the things we did learn about was how to manage trying to do things in this context a little bit more. And yeah, to do it again, I think I would have liked to have slowed it down a little bit and say, okay, let's just try and test, choose some of the things that we really know are going to add value in terms of the students' learning experience, and let's really focus on those and dig a little deeper. So that was probably the main learning in terms of the pilot. In terms of moving forward with it, we've actually carried through the learnings from this, or our lessons learned, into rolling this out for our Bachelor of Food and Nutrition. So our Bachelor of Food and Nutrition is a much larger cohort. There's over 1,000 students. And we've just rolled this out starting, the 28th of August. Started using Zoom Synchronous for their synchronous sessions, and that's been another learning process, because it's taken us a few months to get to where we could do this.
Thanks, Victor. Oriel had a question just regarding how tricky is the multi-screen thing to implement in practice and get that working. And I guess I had another query that I put on Twitter just around, I guess, you mentioned that those staff were quite savvy. So I guess, just thinking about, how tricky is it, and, what might be those challenges for staff who maybe aren't as savvy?
Yeah, pardon me. Yeah, so to kind of, I suppose, to set that paint the picture a little bit more clearly. The staff were I would say, they were seasoned. They weren't all savvy, and I think Sue's was a really good example of that. And what I mean by that is they're really keen, and they would get in there. They would try anything, but everyone's digital literacies skill levels were at very different stages. And Sue's was someone who really who said, look, sometimes I struggle with technology, and we went, okay, well, let's just work with that. And we knew that Sue's was keen to try, and of course, as we all know, when trying, that's half the battle, is trying to get people to try things. And and so we just worked through it, and that we were getting somewhere when Sue's would, we got to a point, and this was in the second session. So only having tried this twice across 3 campuses, where Sue's was just saying, look, just leave me. I'm happy to do this by myself now. And we had there was myself. There was another colleague, Bowen Yang, who was helping in the second session, and we had one of our guys from ICT, Dave Austin, who was online providing remote support from Bendigo. So with having that support there, Suze was just happy to run with it by herself, and obviously, as I mentioned, as when we got to that stage, we knew that that was a good place to be in.
So you'd recommend that people probably need a bit of support at the start?
Oh, definitely. I think it's especially around and to try and answer the question about the shared screens a bit more. Yeah, even today, this morning, I was helping 2 of the BFN staff who were trying to set up their dual monitors for Zoom. And it's just one of those things where there's just a little bit of, there's some extra setup to do. And even though we have, very clear documentation and guides and things like that, people don't really get on top of it until they actually start doing it. So I think it takes it a couple of times before they do it, before they really start to feel comfortable, and then you can start to sort of step back a little bit more. Yeah.
Thanks, Victor. We might wrap it up there. If there's further time for questions at the end, maybe people can save it till then. So thanks again.